The garden hose tasted like summer. That warm, rubbery, metallic sip was the unofficial drink of every kid in the 1970s, and nobody questioned it. The whole decade ran on blind trust and rituals nobody bothered to second-guess. Here are 30 simple pleasures from the 1970s that are completely ruined now. That sip from the garden hose was not just warm water with a funny taste. The standard green PVC hose in your yard contained lead, sometimes at 68,000 parts per million in the flexible tubing alone. The brass fittings connecting it to the spigot held up to 8% lead by weight. Unlike the pipes inside your house, garden hoses had no manufacturing oversight and no safety standards. When water sat in that hose baking in the July sun, it absorbed lead, phthalates, and bisphenol A from the plastic walls and metal connectors. A study by the Ecology Center found BPA levels in hose water 20 times higher than what the National Science Foundation considers safe. You cupped your hands around that nozzle, tilted your head back, and swallowed all of it. So did every kid on the block. And the only rule was not to let it run too long because your dad would yell about the water bill. Before the FDA began regulating sunscreen in 1978, the concept of sun protection barely existed. What your mother called suntan lotion was designed to help you tan faster, not to shield you from anything. Coppertone's bestseller promised a faster, deeper tan, and the highest SPF on a drugstore shelf was a 2 or a 4. Most families skipped the lotion entirely and reached for Johnson's baby oil, sometimes adding a few drops of iodine to speed the browning. The science was essentially basting, coating your skin in oil to intensify the ultraviolet radiation hitting every exposed cell. Nobody understood UVA rays yet, and the connection between sun exposure and melanoma was barely discussed outside dermatology journals. Dermatologists now know that every shade of tanning is a distress response to DNA damage, and the generation that spent its summers glazed in baby oil is now filling waiting rooms at skin cancer clinics across the country. Elmer's glue was a classroom toy that happened to also work as an adhesive. You spread it across your palm, waited for it to dry, and peeled it off in one satisfying sheet, pretending you were shedding like a reptile. Some kids ate it, not accidentally, not once, but regularly, pinching dried flakes off their fingers like snacks. The 1970s formula contained casein, a protein derived from milk, along with trace formaldehyde as a preservative. The formaldehyde was classified as a probable human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Nobody told the kids with dairy allergies that the paste they were chewing was a milk product. Teachers shrugged because the bigger worry was keeping scissors out of ears. Elmer's eventually switched to synthetic polyvinyl acetate, removing both the casein and the formaldehyde, but not before a full generation treated white school glue as both a craft supply and an afternoon snack. The raw cookie dough was the whole point. Your mother cracked eggs into a mixing bowl, added flour, sugar, and butter, and every kid in the kitchen understood the deal. She got the cookies and you got the beater, the spatula, and whatever clung to the sides of the bowl. Raw batter was a reward for standing around watching someone else bake. Nobody considered it dangerous because eggs came from the store and flour came from a sealed bag. The CDC now classifies raw flour as a vehicle for E. coli contamination, after a 2016 outbreak traced to General Mills sickened 63 people across 24 states and triggered a recall of 10 million pounds of product. The bacteria survives in dry flour for months. Raw eggs carry salmonella at a rate the USDA estimates at 1 in every 20,000. Commercial cookie dough now comes stamped with warnings that would have baffled any mother in the 70s. If the garden hose was the drink of the decade, the station wagon was the vehicle, and nobody inside it wore a seatbelt. The Ford Country Squire, the Chevy Caprice Classic, the Plymouth Volar, these wood-paneled boats had a rear-facing third seat in the cargo area where kids rode with no restraints, no padding, and nothing between them and the tailgate window but a thin sheet of glass. Not a single state had a child restraint law until Tennessee in 1978, and no state required seatbelt use for anyone until New York in 1984. Kids sprawled across cargo floors with pillows on road trips, slid across vinyl bench seats on sharp turns, and stood between the front seats to talk to their parents at highway speed. The dashboards were unpadded metal. The steering columns were solid steel. The frames had no crumple zones. The motor vehicle death rate per mile driven was 4 to 5 times what it is today. The sound was unmistakable, a hard, rhythmic crack, crack, crack echoing across every schoolyard in America. Clackers were 2 heavy acrylic balls on a string with a ring in the middle, and the goal was to swing them fast enough to collide above and below your hand in a continuous loop. Mastering the rhythm earned you playground credibility. Losing control earned you a bruised forearm or a chipped tooth. The real danger came from knockoff versions manufactured with cheap acrylic that shattered on impact and sent jagged shards flying at eye level. Kids arrived at school with cuts across their cheeks and plastic embedded under their skin. The CPSC pulled clackers from shelves by 1976 after hundreds of documented facial injuries and at least one case of a child losing partial vision from a fragment strike. The original branded versions held up better, but the knockoffs were sold at 5 and dime stores to any kid with pocket change and no receipt required. In 1979, the Consumer Product Safety Commission discovered that millions of hairdryers contained asbestos in their heat shields and were blowing microscopic fibers directly into the lungs of anyone who used them. The CPSC negotiated a voluntary recall covering roughly 18 million affected units. But a voluntary recall meant the companies asked nicely for their products back, and most consumers never heard a word about it. The asbestos insulated the heating element, and every time you switched the dryer on, the hot air stream picked up loose fibers and delivered them into your hair, onto your skin, and straight down your throat. Teenage girls standing in front of bathroom mirrors before school were breathing a Class 1 carcinogen with every pass of the nozzle. Only a fraction of those 18 million dryers were ever returned. The rest stayed in bathroom cabinets across the country, used daily until they broke and tossed without a thought. Mattel's creepy crawlers. Thingmaker gave kids their own miniature factory for making rubber insects. The process involved pouring liquid plastic called plastigoop into open metal molds and sliding them into an electric hot plate that hit 390 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cause a deep contact burn in under a second. There were no guards over the heating element, no insulated handles on the trays, and the goop released chemical fumes that filled whatever room the thing was used in. Burns from touching the hot molds were so common among owners that the scars became a badge of honor, the kind of injury you bragged about at recess the next morning. Mattel never issued a recall. They phased out the original design by the mid-70s and relaunched it in the 90s with locked ovens, lower temperatures, and non-toxic gels. The original model was sold for nearly 10 years without intervention from a single regulatory agency. A Saturday at the public pool in 1973 meant arriving at 10 and not leaving until the lifeguard blew the closing whistle. 8 hours of direct sun with nothing on your skin except maybe copper tone with an SPF of 2, which blocked roughly half of UVB rays and none of the UVA. Most kids wore nothing at all and considered a sunburn a normal part of the weekend. The FDA did not regulate sunscreen until 1978, and before that, manufacturers could print anything they wanted on the label. "Tan, don't burn" was Coppertone's actual slogan, as if the two were separate biological events. PABA, the era's primary UV blocking ingredient, caused allergic reactions in enough users that it was eventually phased out entirely. The Skin Cancer Foundation now estimates that 5 or more blistering sunburns before age 20 doubles a person's lifetime melanoma risk. The kids who logged every summer at the pool are now the patients. The sharp, sweet smell of Tester's model cement was as familiar as any household scent in the 1970s, a dizzying chemical haze that hung in bedrooms where kids hunched over plastic model kits for hours. The glue contained toluene and acetone, both neurotoxins, and it was sold without age restrictions to anyone with $1.25. The smell was the toluene, and inhaling it caused headaches, dizziness, and in chronic exposure, permanent neurological damage. By the mid-70s, inhalant abuse among teenagers had become a public health crisis, and model glue was a primary substance. Testers responded by adding oil of mustard, a foul-smelling bittering agent, to discourage sniffing. The toluene stayed. The company reformulated with less toxic solvents in the 80s, but the original tube spent a decade as the most accessible neurotoxin on the hobby aisle. If your kitchen counter in 1975 had an avocado green appliance with a brown ceramic insert and a glass lid, you owned a rival crock-pot, and it ran for 8 hours while nobody was home. The insulation packed between the inner pot and the outer metal shell was crocodylite, also known as blue asbestos, the most lethal form of the mineral. It was there because the appliance needed to hold heat during long cook times, and asbestos was the cheapest effective insulator on the market. The power cord was wrapped in it too. As long as the outer casing stayed intact, the fibers remained contained, but any crack, chip, or wear to the housing could release microscopic fibers into the kitchen air where your family was eating. Millions of units were sold through the 70s with no recall, no warning label, and no consumer notification of any kind. Families cooked pot roast in an appliance insulated with a substance that causes mesothelioma, and the manufacturer said nothing. Every kid had a pencil with teeth marks in it. Chewing the end of a number 2 pencil was automatic, a nervous habit that left the yellow paint cracked and the wood damp with saliva. That yellow paint was the problem. The signature color of the American pencil was achieved with lead chromate, a pigment that gave the wood its bright, distinctive finish, and happened to be a toxic compound containing hexavalent chromium. Dixon, Ticonderoga, Eberhard Faber, and other manufacturers coated their pencils in it because yellow sold and parents associated the color with quality. Kids who chewed through the lacquer were ingesting lead chromate with every bite, and the aggressive chewers who stripped it to bare wood in a single math class got the heaviest dose. The industry transitioned to lead-free paints in the 80s, but the switch was voluntary, driven by pigment economics rather than any government mandate. The pencil on your desk in 1976 was almost certainly coated in lead. Shaking that aluminum pan over the burner and watching the foil dome rise was one of the great kitchen spectacles of the 1970s. Jiffy Pop was popcorn in a show, the foil expanding like a silver balloon while the kernels rattled inside. The pan's interior coating contained perfluorooctanoic acid, now classified as a forever chemical because it does not break down in the human body or the environment. DuPont and 3M had known since the late 1960s that PFOA accumulated in the blood of factory workers and caused liver damage in lab animals. They published none of it. The chemical leached into the popcorn at cooking temperatures, and families ate it by the handful. PFOA has since been linked to kidney cancer, thyroid disease, and immune suppression. The EPA did not regulate it until the 2000s, decades after manufacturers had internal evidence of its danger. The disco ball threw colored light across the wooden floor. The Bee Gees poured from the speakers, and 50 kids on metal-wheeled skates orbited the rink at whatever speed their legs could manage. Roller rinks in the 1970s had no helmet requirements, no wrist guards, no padding on the walls, and floors waxed with volatile organic compounds that gave the place its distinctive chemical smell. The skates were heavy steel frames bolted to leather boots with no brakes on most rental pairs. A fall at speed on that hardwood meant a concussion or a broken wrist, and the rink's first aid kit was a box of Band-Aids behind the snack counter. Between 1980 and 2020, more than 70% of America's roller rinks closed permanently, killed by insurance premiums that climbed every year as injury claims mounted. The ones that remain require helmets and pads for minors, and the rental skates have rubber stoppers now. The dangers inside the house were invisible, chemicals and fibers you could not see. The danger in the backyard was a rusting steel frame bolted to nothing. Metal swing sets in the 1970s were assembled from thin-gauge steel tubing sunk a few inches into the dirt or left sitting on the grass with no anchoring. The chains had open S-hooks that pinched fingers and caught hair. The slides were bare sheet metal that absorbed the summer sun and raised blisters on the backs of bare legs. When two kids pumped the swings out of rhythm, the frame rocked and lifted off the ground. The CPSC documented over 150,000 emergency room visits per year from backyard playground equipment during the decade. There were no impact-absorbing surfaces underneath, no rounded edges, and no weight limits posted. The ground was packed dirt, patchy grass, or bare concrete. A card table, a pitcher, a stack of paper cups, and a handwritten sign that said, "Lemonade 10 cents." That was a business in the 1970s, and no 7-year-old needed a permit. You squeezed the lemons or dumped in a packet of Country Time, set up on the sidewalk, and waited for neighbors. The transaction required no sales tax, no health department inspection, and no food handler certification. Now it requires all three in most American cities. Since 2010, police and health inspectors have shut down lemonade stands in at least 37 states. Fines have ranged from $50 to $500. In 2018, Country Time launched a program called Legal Aid, offering to cover fines and permit fees for kids whose stands got closed. The company treated it as marketing. The kids who got fined did not find it amusing. The simplest business model in American childhood now requires paperwork. It came in a pink can, it tasted faintly metallic, and your mother kept a six-pack in the refrigerator at all times. Tab was the diet soda of the 1970s, sweetened first with cyclamate until the FDA banned that in 1969, then with saccharin, which landed on a different government watch list. In 1977, Congress passed the Saccharin Study and Labeling Act, requiring every can to carry a warning that saccharin caused cancer in laboratory animals. Your mother drank it anyway because the alternative was sugar, and the diet culture of the decade left no room for calories. Tab remained the best-selling diet soda through 1982. Cancer warning and all. The scare was debunked in 2000 when researchers found the cancer link applied only to rodent biology, but the damage to Tab's reputation was permanent. Coca-Cola discontinued it in 2020. The smell hit you from 3 blocks away, sweet and smoky, the signal that autumn had arrived in suburban America. Raking leaves into a pile at the curb and setting them on fire was a weekend ritual, and entire neighborhoods burned simultaneously, filling the air with haze that hung between the houses until nightfall. The Clean Air Act of 1970 gave the EPA authority to regulate air pollutants, and municipalities began banning open burning through the decade. Leaf smoke contains carbon monoxide, benzene, and fine particulate matter small enough to lodge deep in the lungs. A single afternoon of leaf burning can produce particulate levels exceeding what the EPA considers hazardous for a 24-hour period. Open burning is now illegal in most American cities. The leaves go into paper bags for composting pickup. The smell is gone. The ritual is gone. Mercury thermometers broke all the time, slipping off nightstands and shattering on tile floors, releasing a pool of liquid silver that scattered into dozens of tiny gleaming balls. Kids chased them, scooped them up with their fingers, rolled them across tabletops, and watched them split apart and rejoin like something alive. Some brought mercury to school in jars and traded it at recess. The substance they were handling is a potent neurotoxin that absorbs directly through the skin and evaporates at room temperature into invisible vapor that enters the lungs with every breath. Chronic mercury exposure damages the kidneys, the nervous system, and the developing brain, and the effects are cumulative and irreversible. Mercury thermometers were phased out of most American retailers by the early 2000s, and today a single spill in a school triggers a full hazmat response. In the 70s, your mother wiped it up with a paper towel and threw it in the kitchen trash. Sunbeam sold millions of electric blankets through the 1970s, and on cold nights they were the last thing you switched on before sleep. The wiring ran through insulation that contained asbestos, and the controls were simple on-off switches with no automatic shutoff, no overheat protection, and no timer to cut the power after a set number of hours. A blanket left on all night could overheat, and if the wires shorted or kinked, the result was a fire that started in the bed while the occupant slept. The CPSC documented hundreds of fires and burn injuries linked to electric blankets during the decade. Studies in the 1980s raised additional concerns about electromagnetic field exposure from sleeping on top of energized wiring for 8 hours a night. The blankets were never recalled and never banned. Manufacturers eventually added shutoff features, but the 70s era models stayed in linen closets for decades. The truck rolled through the neighborhood at dusk, spraying a thick white cloud from a nozzle mounted on the back, and every kid on the street ran straight into it. Chasing the mosquito fogger was a summer ritual across the American South and Midwest, and the chemical filling that cloud was DDT, a pesticide so persistent it had been linked to the near extinction of bald eagles by thinning their eggshells. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring laid out the evidence in 1962. The EPA banned DDT for agricultural use in 1972, but municipal fogging programs were slower to change, and some towns kept rolling well into the mid-70s with remaining stockpiles. DDT is classified as a probable human carcinogen, and its breakdown products remain detectable in American soil and human blood more than 50 years after the ban. The kids who ran through that cloud were breathing a substance that does not leave the body and does not leave the earth. You colored them with markers, cut them out with scissors, placed them on a cookie sheet, and watched through the oven window as they curled, twisted, and shrank to a third of their original size. Shrinky Dinks were made from number 6 polystyrene, the same plastic used in foam cups and takeout containers, and heating it to 300 degrees in a home oven released styrene vapor into the kitchen air. The National Toxicology Program classified styrene as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen in 2011, based on evidence linking occupational exposure to lymphoma and leukemia in factory workers. The product was never pulled from shelves and is still sold today with a small note recommending ventilation. In the 1970s, ventilation meant cracking the kitchen window while 3 kids stood inches from the oven door, faces pressed to the glass, breathing whatever came out when you opened it to check if the plastic had finished shrinking. The garage smelled like grease and metal shavings, and your dad was under the front end with a socket wrench. Changing brake pads was a standard weekend job in the 1970s, and kids stood next to the jack stands handing over tools. The pads being removed were made with chrysotile asbestos, and the fine gray dust coating the wheel assembly was loaded with it. Home mechanics blew that dust off with compressed air, sending a visible cloud of fibers into the garage and the lungs of anyone nearby. The EPA did not finalize a ban on asbestos in brake products until 2024, more than 5 decades after the health risks were documented. For all those years, every brake job in a home garage created an exposure event, and the kids who watched their fathers work breathed the same fibers that filled the lungs of shipyard workers and insulation installers. The chips curled off the windowsill in thick, satisfying flakes, and some of them tasted sweet. Lead paint was not banned for residential use until 1978, and before that it covered the walls, trim, and window frames of nearly every home built before mid-century. The paint contained up to 50% lead by weight, and as it aged, it cracked into chips that collected on sills, floors, and the soil around the foundation. The CDC estimates 3 to 4 million American kids had elevated blood lead levels during the 70s. Lead damages the developing brain at any dose, causing lowered IQ, behavioral disorders, and learning disabilities that persist into adulthood. There is no safe threshold. The Department of Housing and Urban Development estimates 24 million homes still contain lead paint, and the generation that peeled those sweet-tasting chips carries neurological consequences researchers are still measuring. Your feet did not reach the pedals, but your hands were on the wheel and your father's knee was the only seatbelt you had. Sitting on a parent's lap in the driver's seat was how kids in the 1970s learned what a car felt like, usually on a quiet street or an empty lot, sometimes on the highway during a long stretch of nothing. There were no airbags. The steering column was a rigid steel shaft pointed at the driver's chest, and in a frontal collision it acted like a spear aimed at whoever sat behind it. Collapsible columns did not become standard until the mid-70s, and even then a child perched on the driver's lap would have been crushed between the adult and the dashboard on impact. No law prohibited it. No public safety campaign warned against it. It was a rite of passage, and the fact that most kids survived it does not change what the engineering said would happen if the car stopped suddenly. Each one weighed about a pound, had a heavy metal tip sharp enough to pierce the ground on impact, and was designed to be thrown in a high arc across the yard. Lawn darts, sold under the brand name Jarts, were played at backyard barbecues across the country throughout the 1970s. The CPSC estimated more than 6,000 emergency room visits and documented at least 3 child fatalities. The first restrictions came in 1970 when regulators reclassified them, but manufacturers negotiated a compromise that kept them on shelves with a warning label. It took the death of 7-year-old Michelle Snow in 1987 to force a full ban. Her father, David Snow, spent years lobbying the CPSC and testifying before Congress for the ban that finally came in 1988. The product had been injuring kids for nearly 2 decades before anyone with authority to stop it did. It looked like fluffy gray pebbles and felt like dry cereal between your fingers. And it was everywhere in the attic, piled between the joists in loose heaps that kids scooped up and threw like indoor snowballs. The material was zonolite, a vermiculite insulation sold by W.R. Grace, and it came from a mine outside Libby, Montana, contaminated with tremolite asbestos. Zonolite was installed in an estimated 35 million American homes. The miners in Libby developed mesothelioma and asbestosis at rates that dwarfed the national average, and hundreds died. W.R. Grace knew about the contamination for decades and buried the evidence, fighting lawsuits and resisting federal investigators at every turn. The EPA declared Libby a Superfund site in 2002, but the insulation was already in the attics and crawl spaces. Every handful a kid grabbed, every cloud that rose when they jumped on it, carried fibers that do not leave the lungs once inhaled. Johnson & Johnson's baby powder was the smell of clean. You dusted it on after every bath, shook it into every diaper change, and the white talcum cloud that rose from the bottle was as much a part of infant care as warm water and a soft towel. Internal company memos from 1971 show that Johnson & Johnson's own scientists detected asbestos fibers in their talc supply and raised alarms about contamination risks. They suppressed those findings for decades. Thousands of lawsuits followed, alleging the contaminated powder caused ovarian cancer and mesothelioma, and the company has paid billions in settlements and jury verdicts. Johnson & Johnson did not switch from talc to a cornstarch formula until 2023, 52 years after their scientists first flagged the problem. For half a century, families shook that bottle over their newborns and breathed in the powder alongside them, trusting the name on the label. Nobody drove you. You walked out the front door with your lunchbox, crossed the street by yourself, and arrived at school 20 minutes later without an adult in sight. Walking to school alone at 6 was the default in the 1970s, not a choice but an assumption so basic it needed no discussion. The shift came gradually, driven less by crime rates, which peaked in the early 90s and have fallen since, than by cultural panic amplified by cable news and stranger danger campaigns. In 2008, journalist Lenore Skenazy was dubbed America's Worst Mom for letting her 9-year-old ride the New York subway alone. She launched the free-range kids movement. Utah passed the first free-range parenting law in 2018, protecting parents from neglect charges for letting kids walk to school unsupervised. The fact that a law was necessary tells you everything about what changed. An M80 contained 3 grams of flash powder, roughly 1/8 of a stick of dynamite, and it was sold from roadside stands and flea markets to anyone with cash. Cherry bombs and silver salutes packed similar charges into compact casings. The CPSC had classified these as banned hazardous substances under the 1966 Child Protection Act, but enforcement in rural areas was almost non-existent through the 70s. Kids bought them for the 4th of July the same way they bought sparklers, by the bag. The difference was that M80s were explosive devices with no directional fuse, no safety delay, and enough force to separate fingers from a hand. The CPSC documented thousands of amputation injuries during the decade. They are still manufactured illegally and sold in parts of the country where enforcement has not caught up. The 4th of July in the 70s was louder than it had any right to be. Ceramic owl cookie jars were equal parts charming and terrifying. Their wide, unblinking eyes watched over the kitchen, guarding every treat inside. For kids, sneaking a cookie meant facing that silent stare, a challenge of courage and stealth. The lids always betrayed you, clattering like an alarm the second you lifted them. Each owl seemed to have its own personality, stern, goofy, or just slightly menacing. They sat proudly beside coffee makers and flour tins, always a little too large for the counter but impossible to hide. Some families even named theirs, giving the owls a kind of strange, sugary authority. The cookies inside were secondary. It was the ritual of sneaking past the owl that made childhood thrilling. They were handmade in every shade of brown, orange, and gold, blending perfectly with the earthy tones of the era. Each owl had its own personality, from goofy to regal, perched on the counter like a guardian of sugar. They were whimsical, strange, and utterly unforgettable. Every home had one, and every child knew exactly how loud the lid could clatter if they weren't careful. Looking back, those owls feel almost alive, goofy little sentinels of childhood mischief and sweet rewards. Neighborhood kickball matches brought whole blocks of kids together until streetlights buzzed on. Someone rolled out the red rubber ball, bases marked with jackets, cars as foul lines. The game erupted, everyone welcome, from little siblings to competitive teens. Arguments ended in laughter or do-overs. Sneakers squeaked on pavement, and dogs barked at the chaos. Games stretched until dusk, when glowing streetlights signaled the final play. Sweaty, scraped, and smiling, kids trudged home with pride. In the 1970s, kickball was the soundtrack of summer. Cars without seatbelts for everyone were the norm in the 1970s. Many vehicles only had lap belts in the front seats, while back seats often had no restraints at all. Children piled into station wagons, sitting on the floor, in trunks, or even stretched out across the back bench seat. Families went on road trips with kids rolling around freely, playing games, or lying down for naps. Some kids even rode with their heads sticking out of windows or sat facing backward, waving at drivers behind them. Others built pillow forts in the back during long drives, completely unbuckled. It was a mix of chaos and freedom that defined family car travel. Parents did not worry about safety harnesses or buckles because the expectation simply was not there. Seat belts were considered optional at best, and many drivers tucked them behind seats so they would not wrinkle clothes. Campaigns like "Buckle Up for Safety" had only just begun, and it would be decades before seatbelt laws became standard nationwide. Looking back, the thought of driving at highway speeds with an entire family unrestrained is terrifying, but at the time it was just how things were done. Glass grape cluster lamps were mood lighting at its most dramatic. Dozens of translucent globes, each shaped like a grape, glowed in deep purples, greens, and ambers. When lit, they turned an ordinary dining room into something out of a dream. Soft, mysterious, and just a little kitschy. They hung low over velvet chairs and wood-paneled walls, glowing like jewels in the half-dark. The light was romantic, almost cinematic, perfect for dinner parties and whispered conversations. Everyone who owned one swore it made their home feel modern, even if it looked like a disco met a vineyard. Each lamp was part light fixture, part sculpture, the kind of thing that made guests stop and stare. The glow wasn't just pretty, it was hypnotic, like candlelight with a twist of disco. And for a while, it made everyone feel a little fancier, a little more glamorous. When they finally went out of style, they didn't just fade, they disappeared, tucked into attics and basements. But once in a while, you'll see one light up again, and for a second, it feels like the room is alive with the past. School milk in cartons was a universal experience of the 1970s. Lunch trays came with waxy cartons, often lukewarm and hard to open. Some kids folded them wrong and spilled, while others stabbed straws through the sides in frustration. The taste was rarely right, sour, too creamy, or just plain warm. The smell of spilled milk mixing with peanut butter sandwiches became part of cafeteria life. For many, it was more chore than treat, but it was unavoidable. Lunchrooms echoed with tearing cartons and laughter. It was not gourmet, But decades later, the memory sticks, proof of how small rituals shape childhood. Drinking and driving viewed casually is perhaps one of the most jarring shifts from the 1970s to now. The phrase "one for the road" was not just a joke, it was an accepted practice. Many cars had built-in ashtrays and even cup holders designed with beer cans in mind. People drove home from bars with open containers in the passenger seat, and no one batted an eye. It was common to see beer cans rolling under seats or tucked in glove compartments, evidence of how normal it was. Even passengers joined in, sipping drinks on highways as if it were no different from having a soda. Roadside checks were rare, and the culture itself downplayed the risks. Police were far less strict, and DUI laws were weakly enforced compared to today. It was not unusual to see someone sip from a can of beer while cruising down the highway. The cultural mindset was shockingly relaxed about the dangers, partly because campaigns about drunk driving had not yet taken hold. Families sometimes even joked about dad having a few too many, but still driving home. Tragic accidents eventually led to tougher laws and greater awareness, but in the 1970s, casual drinking and driving was simply part of the culture. Fake fruit centerpieces were the crown jewels of 1970s dining tables, and nobody ever ate them. Perfectly polished plastic apples, grapes, and bananas sat under glass domes, gleaming like treasures from another world. They were supposed to represent abundance, health, and sophistication, but mostly they collected dust. Each piece had a strangely perfect shine, reflecting the light like something both real and fake at once. Every kid tried to sneak a taste, only to end up embarrassed and disappointed. But for all their flaws, those fake fruits were a point of pride, proof that beauty could be arranged and everlasting. You'd reach for a grape out of curiosity and nearly crack a tooth on plastic. Still, families kept them, adjusting the arrangement as though the fruit might someday ripen. Kids were scolded for touching them, which somehow made them all the more tempting. Those fake fruit bowls became part of the furniture, eternal, unchanging, and faintly sticky. Now they're relics of an era that wanted everything to look good forever, even if it wasn't real. Avocado green and harvest gold kitchens defined the decade. Refrigerators, stoves, and blenders all carried earthy tones, paired with patterned laminate counters and bold wallpaper. Families posed proudly in photos, colors etched into memory. These hues appeared in nearly every neighborhood, creating a look still instantly recognizable today. Appliances were sturdy, lasting for years, but the colors became icons of the era. Decades later, people groan at the sight, but for those who grew up then, avocado and gold meant home, warmth, and family meals. School field trips without permission slips seem impossible today, but back then it was a common practice. Teachers would gather the class, take a quick head count, and pile everyone onto a bus for a trip to the zoo, a museum, or even a factory tour. There were no stacks of paperwork, no emergency contact lists, and no signed forms tucked into backpacks. Kids were often surprised to find out where they were going only once the bus started moving. Some students came home covered in dirt from farms or dazzled by machinery from factory tours, retelling stories to parents who had no idea the trip even happened. The spontaneity made the day feel like an adventure, adding to the thrill. Parents often did not even know where their kids were going until the child came home with a story to tell. It was a time when trust in schools and teachers was nearly absolute, and communities felt smaller and safer. The idea of liability or lawsuits was far from people's minds, and permission was assumed rather than documented. Looking back, it feels carefree but also risky. Children traveling across town with little more than a roll call to keep track of them. Yet for many kids, these trips became some of their best memories of school, precisely because of that freedom. Plug-in air fresheners with oil cartridges promised fresh mountain air in a plastic shell. They plugged into outlets like small miracles, glowing faintly as they puffed out invisible clouds of pine, lilac, or tropical breeze. For homeowners, they were modern marvels, the end of spray cans and matchsticks. The air felt cleaner, even if the scent was as artificial as it came. Sometimes the oil would drip down the wall, leaving strange glossy marks that no one dared mention. But the smell, sweet and strong, could mask anything from last night's fish dinner to a week's worth of laundry. Every plug-in felt like a badge of modern pride, humming softly beside the floral wallpaper. Every hallway smelled like a perfume counter at the mall, and everyone secretly loved it. They were the finishing touch in a freshly vacuumed home, proof that you cared, even if the mountain air came from a socket. And when the cartridge finally dried out, you knew it was time for a Saturday cleaning spree. Looking back, those little gadgets were less about the smell and more about the feeling. A house that seemed alive, humming gently with the scent of new. Cafeteria pizza squares were unforgettable. Served on plastic trays, the rubbery slices had crusts tough to cut and cheese that stretched like glue. The smell of oregano drifted through hallways, letting everyone know it was pizza day. Some folded them into sandwiches, others sprinkled crackers on top to add crunch. Even with soggy crusts, excitement turned pizza day into the highlight of the week. Lunchrooms buzzed louder, kids comparing who got the biggest square. Some swore by ranch dressing, others shook salt and pepper, but everyone agreed it was better than meatloaf. For 1970s kids, those greasy squares were legendary. Selling cigarettes to teenagers in vending machines was shockingly normal. These machines were everywhere, in restaurants, bowling alleys, and even outside grocery stores. Teenagers could walk right up, drop in some quarters, pull a knob, and walk away with a pack of cigarettes. No identification was checked, and no one questioned whether the buyer was old enough. For many teenagers, buying from vending machines was their first brush with independence. Groups of kids hung around the machines, daring each other to buy packs just for the thrill. The glowing lights of the machines made them almost inviting, blending in with arcade games and soda dispensers. The machines became hangouts for kids who often bought cigarettes just because they could. For adults, it was a convenience, but for teenagers, it was a loophole that made smoking easy and accessible. Anti-smoking campaigns had not yet taken hold in the way they would in later decades, and the dangers of tobacco were still downplayed in popular culture. By today's standards, the idea of unsupervised teenagers buying cigarettes out of a vending machine feels absurd, but in the 1970s, it was just another part of everyday life. Crocheted tissue box covers were handmade masterpieces of confusion. Each one was lovingly crafted to disguise something no one ever minded seeing: a box of tissues. Yarn of every color, twisted and looped into wild patterns, transformed plain cardboard into art that defied reason. They were bright, fuzzy statements of love, slightly itchy, slightly crooked, but proudly made by hand. Every household had one gifted by a relative who swore it tied the room together. They may have looked odd, but they carried something real: effort, time, and care woven into every loop. Some were shaped like dolls, some like poodles, and some like little houses, complete with windows and doors. Grandmothers made them for everyone, insisting they added warmth to the room. You'd smile politely as you pulled a tissue from a crocheted skirt and wondered if this counted as art or assault. They were everywhere, on nightstands, in bathrooms, and proudly displayed in living rooms like trophies of love and awkwardness. They may have hidden tissues, but they revealed something else entirely: a time when homemade meant heartfelt, even if it also meant a little bit strange. Record players in living rooms were the heart of family entertainment. A stack of vinyl leaned against the wall, covers worn from use. Parents and kids sat together as the needle crackled and music filled the air, disco, Motown, or crooners depending on the night. Carefully lowering the needle felt like a ritual, and skipping songs was impossible, making every track familiar. Friends brought their own records, turning living rooms into shared concerts. Today's streaming is convenient, but nothing matches the warmth of vinyl spinning in a room alive with family. Do you remember the items that were completely normal in the 1970s but would be illegal now? These were the everyday habits, products, and choices that shaped family life, trusted without question and woven into daily routines. But when ordinary memories turn into outlawed relics, what does that say about how much we have really changed? Drinking age of 18 in many states was a reality that shocks people today. In the 1970s, teenagers who had barely graduated high school could walk into a corner store, hand over a few dollars, and buy a six-pack of beer without question. It was legal in dozens of states, and for many, it was a rite of passage. College towns thrived on it, with freshmen celebrating their new freedom not just with dorm parties, but with legal trips to the bar. Parents often shrugged it off as part of growing up, and bartenders rarely turned anyone away as long as they had the cash. The culture of the time simply did not see alcohol as something that needed to be as tightly regulated as it is now. Campaigns against drunk driving had not yet reached their peak, and laws varied widely from state to state. For those who lived through it, the memory of grabbing a beer at 18 still lingers as a sign of how relaxed society once was. It feels almost unthinkable now, but in the 1970s it was just normal life. Padded toilet seats were the height of comfort and the height of embarrassment. Covered in soft vinyl that hissed when you sat down, they were supposed to make the bathroom feel more luxurious. Instead, they felt like sitting on a deflating pool float. But in the 1970s and 1980s, comfort was everything, even in the smallest room of the house. Bathrooms were decorated with shag rugs, pastel wallpaper, and seashell soap dishes, so why not a cushioned throne to match? They squeaked under pressure and groaned in protest, like a secret you couldn't hide. For kids, they were funny. For adults, they were dignity disguised as design. No one wanted to admit it, but once you got used to the warmth, you never wanted to go back to cold porcelain. They trapped warmth in the winter, squeaked in the summer, and always made guests pause before committing to a sit. Yet somehow, every home had one. The hiss was as familiar as the sound of running water, an oddly human sigh of relief. Over time, the vinyl would crack and peel, but no one could quite bring themselves to throw it out. It was proof that style and comfort had once gone hand in hand, even when maybe they shouldn't have. Brown bag school lunches with Twinkies were a classic. Bags held peanut butter or bologna sandwiches, fruit, and maybe chips, with your name scribbled in marker. The real prize sat at the bottom, a Hostess Twinkie, golden and indestructible. Sometimes flattened under an apple, it still tasted sweet. Kids traded fruit for desserts, saving Twinkies as prized currency. Lunch tables buzzed with chatter and crinkling wrappers, kids proudly showing off their treasures. Even bruised apples or soggy sandwiches could not spoil the thrill. Today's snacks are endless, but in the 1970s, nothing beat the joy of finding a Twinkie in your lunch. Candy cigarettes marketed to kids showed just how differently the 1970s viewed smoking culture. These chalky, sweet sticks came in boxes that looked exactly like real cigarette packs, complete with brand names and logos. Some even had powdered sugar that puffed out like smoke when you blew on them. Kids mimicked adults by holding them between fingers, lighting them, and pretending to smoke. Parents laughed and took photos, never thinking twice about the message it sent. Playgrounds often turned into smoking lounges, with kids showing off fake packs as if they were grown-ups. Some even argued about which brand tasted better, copying conversations they had overheard from parents. Candy shops displayed them proudly, treating them as just another treat. They were sold right alongside candy bars at every corner store, making them irresistible to children. It was not until much later that society realized how inappropriate it was to encourage kids to play with fake cigarettes. Today, the idea of marketing a candy that mimics smoking seems outrageous, but back then, it was just another example of how normalized smoking was in daily life. Kitchen radios built into cabinets were the morning heartbeat of the American home. Before smartphones, before Bluetooth, those little boxes filled kitchens with news, weather, and oldies, while the smell of bacon filled the air. The dial clicked softly as hands turned the station, tuning in to familiar voices that felt like family. Some models even had built-in clocks or timers, blending perfectly into the rhythm of breakfast and busy mornings. Static would buzz as the coffee percolated, and that fuzzy sound somehow made everything feel more real. Kids would sit at the table, waiting for the school bus, listening to jingles and morning talk shows that seemed to last forever. Parents relied on that soft hum of chatter to fill the quiet before the day began. It wasn't just background noise, it was the soundtrack of daily life, comforting in its routine. The radio didn't just play music, it announced the start of another ordinary, wonderful day. Mothers hummed along to their favorite tunes while packing lunches. Fathers caught the headlines before work. The radio wasn't background noise, it was company. It marked the rhythm of the day, from sunrise toast to midnight snacks. Now, when we hear that warm, fuzzy static, it feels like a memory wrapped in sound. The soundtrack of a slower, kinder time. Polaroid pictures at family gatherings captured magic like nothing else. Relatives crowded kitchens and living rooms, laughing as the bulky camera clicked and spat out film. Everyone huddled close, waiting for colors to appear. Some came out blurry, ghostly, or too bright, but flaws made them treasures. Albums filled with taped Polaroids became sticky time capsules. Polaroids froze moments with honesty, smudges and all. Looking back, they remain symbols of a time when memories unfolded slowly, right in your hands. Riding in the back of pickup trucks was one of the ultimate thrills of the 1970s. Kids and even adults piled into the open bed, sitting on wheel wells or dangling their legs over the edge as the truck sped down roads and highways. It was seen as harmless fun, a way to pack more people into a vehicle during summer outings, parades, or even just casual drives. No one thought about the lack of safety, and there were no laws stopping it. Children stood up to feel the rush of wind, holding onto the sides as the truck bounced over bumps. Families laughed together on hayrides or waved to neighbors during parades, treating it like a carnival ride. Even dogs joined in, tails wagging as they leaned into the breeze. For children, the wind rushing past and the feeling of freedom made it one of the most exciting rides of their lives. Parents sometimes even encouraged it, especially in rural areas where it was considered part of growing up. Today, the very idea of riding unrestrained in the open back of a truck on a freeway feels reckless and dangerous. But in the 1970s, it was a symbol of carefree childhood. Plastic floor runners were the ultimate paradox of 1970s homekeeping, meant to protect but impossible to love. Clear and ridged, they stretched across shag carpets like invisible armor, guarding every inch from dirt and footprints. They squeaked under socks, jabbed at bare feet, and somehow never stayed flat. Every child learned the art of hopping from carpet to carpet, avoiding the painful plastic path of doom. The runners trapped air bubbles underneath, making odd squishing noises with every step. They curled at the edges and collected crumbs that no vacuum could reach. And still, every parent swore they were saving the carpet from ruin, as if the floor itself were a family treasure. The runners were supposed to preserve beauty, but all they really preserved were memories of discomfort. And yet, they became as familiar as the furniture itself. A sign that someone cared, maybe a little too much. Still, every parent swore by them, convinced that no guest should ever touch the sacred carpet underneath. They were a mark of pride, proof that a home was spotless, even if it didn't feel that way. Walking across one barefoot was a test of endurance. Surviving it was a childhood rite of passage. Today, they're remembered with both laughter and pain, a relic of when protection meant never actually feeling at home. Long summer road trips in station wagons stretched across miles of highway and felt like adventures of their own. Families piled in with no seatbelts, just pillows, snacks, and restless kids crammed in the back. Games like I Spy, 20 Questions, and license plate spotting filled the hours. Stops turned into mini picnics, sandwiches eaten off hoods, sodas from coolers. Quirky roadside attractions, giant dinosaurs, or odd museums became unforgettable surprises. Suitcases rattled, maps guided parents, and getting lost became part of the adventure. Leaving kids home alone as latchkey children was an accepted reality in the 1970s. Parents worked long hours, and childcare options were limited, so kids often came home from school to empty houses. They wore house keys around their necks, let themselves in, and made snacks until parents arrived later in the evening. Television became a babysitter, and frozen dinners filled the gap when kids cooked for themselves. It was not considered neglect, it was simply what families did to make ends meet. Communities trusted that children were responsible enough to handle it, and parents expected independence from a young age. Today, child welfare guidelines and laws would view this very differently, but at the time it was part of growing up. Being a latchkey kid carried a mix of pride and loneliness, teaching responsibility while also reminding kids how much times have changed. Light-up touch lamps were pure magic to anyone who grew up in the 1980s. You didn't need a switch, just a fingertip. With a single touch, the lamp would glow brighter, shimmering off metallic shades that looked straight out of a science fiction movie. Kids couldn't resist tapping them over and over, fascinated by their strange power. Each touch felt like a tiny spark of control, like holding lightning in your hands. The gentle hum and glowing metal made even the darkest bedroom feel like a space station. They made even bedtime feel like a science experiment, a soft hum, a gentle flash, and a sense of wonder that never quite faded. For many kids, it was their first brush with technology that actually listened to them. They lit bedrooms and living rooms alike, humming softly as though alive. There was something futuristic and comforting about them, a small taste of wonder in everyday life. For many, those lamps symbolized modern living, the future, right there on your nightstand. Today, their warm glow feels like a portal back to the past, when technology still amazed us in the simplest ways. Christmas trees draped in silver tinsel lit up holiday living rooms across the 1970s. Families hauled out boxes filled with shiny strands, each one clinging to clothes, carpets, and even pets. Kids tossed them on by the handful, while parents tried to spread them evenly. Despite the mess, no one could deny the magic shimmer it gave the tree. Presents piled underneath, and Polaroids captured that sparkling backdrop in countless family albums. Today's trees are carefully themed, but back then, tinsel was the finishing touch that made everything feel alive. Messy or not, it was unforgettable. Color-changing fiber optic centerpieces were the crown jewels of 1980s decor. A bundle of delicate plastic strands shimmered in rainbow light, casting a soft, shifting glow across coffee tables and mantels. They looked like something from outer space, a little tacky, a little mesmerizing. Guests couldn't stop watching the colors fade from blue to pink to green, as if time itself were melting. When the lights went out, the room would glow like a dreamscape, quiet, hypnotic, alive. Families would gather around them during parties, letting the soft glow wash over laughter and music. Even when unplugged, they looked magical, frozen mid-dance in a tangle of light and memory. Kids would sit cross-legged in front of them, hypnotized by the glowing strands like they were watching fireworks underwater. Even adults couldn't resist turning off the lights just to see the room transform into a swirl of color. Every flicker of color felt alive, pulsing in rhythm with the hum of the house. They were futuristic sculptures that turned any room into a little slice of neon fantasy. Every home that wanted to feel modern had one proudly on display. They didn't just light up a room, they made people dream about the future. Now, seeing one in a thrift shop feels like stumbling upon a lost artifact from an age when color itself felt alive. Bell-bottom jeans and tube socks were the fashion statement of the 1970s. Kids strutted down hallways in wide flared jeans that brushed the floor, paired with tube socks pulled high with bright stripes, jeans dragged until the hems frayed, proof of being cool, while socks peeked out in gym class or during kickball games. Parents shook their heads, insisting the styles were ridiculous, but kids wore them proudly as symbols of identity. The boldness of the look made it impossible to mistake for any other decade. Looking back, bell-bottoms and tube socks were more than clothes. They were cultural badges of individuality and youth. Wooden salad bowls and tongs weren't just for salads. They were symbols of hospitality. Every 1970s dinner party had one in the center of the table, piled high with iceberg lettuce and drenched in tangy dressing. Their rich wood grain gleamed under the glow of amber lights, the scent of oil and vinegar mingling with laughter and conversation. Every scrape of the tongs echoed across the table, a soundtrack to family stories and second helpings. The bowls soaked in flavor over the years, a little garlic, a touch of vinegar, a trace of countless dinners. They were polished and re-oiled like heirlooms, treasured not for beauty but for the meals they witnessed. The tongs clacked together like punctuation marks in conversations that lasted late into the night. The bowls absorbed years of flavor, a little olive oil and memory in every groove. Even when they dulled with time, no one ever threw them out. They aged the same way people did, with character. People treated them like fine china, even though they were often bought at the local department store. Families polished them carefully, passing them down like treasures. To serve salad from one was to serve warmth and welcome. These bowls captured the spirit of togetherness, the kind that lingered long after dinner was done. Saturday morning cartoon marathons were the highlight of every child's week. Kids jumped out of bed earlier than school days, racing to the television before adults claimed it. The lineup was endless. Superheroes, talking animals, zany adventures stacked back to back. Bowls of cereal were poured, blankets dragged to the floor, the living room transformed into a weekend theater. Siblings fought for cushions, elbows flying for the front row. For a few golden hours, the television belonged to kids alone. That scarcity made it unforgettable. Mirrored disco switch plates made even the smallest flick of a switch feel like a party. Tiny, shiny, and dazzling, they turned ordinary walls into miniature dance floors. In an era obsessed with sparkle and light, even the hardware had to shimmer. Each switch plate reflected the world in fragments, glittering glimpses of movement, laughter, and life. Guests could not resist catching their own reflections as they passed, adjusting hair or flashing smiles mid-step. They were proof that even the most functional things could have a little flair, a little fun. The reflection caught everything: sunlight, disco balls, and sometimes just the glint of someone's gold necklace. They were a symbol of optimism, of the idea that life could always have a little shine. Kids would stop to make funny faces in them, and adults liked how they made the room glow just a bit more. For something so small, they had big personality, a final touch of flair in homes that believed more was always better. Today, their tiny mirrors may be dulled by time, but they still catch the light just right, reminding us that once, even the switch to turn on a lamp could feel like an invitation to dance. They told your parents it was safe. If you survived the 70s, like, subscribe, and tell us which one you remember.